Picture the ultimate retail dream. A customer walks out with a vintage designer coat they just scored for $5, feeling like they won the lottery. You stand behind the counter, watching a steady stream of locals cheerfully dropping off bags of inventory for absolutely nothing. The profit margins look mathematically impossible to beat because your cost of goods is practically zero. It sounds like a license to print money. But if you actually buy into that fantasy, you are going to go bankrupt, buried under a mountain of damp, smelling fabric. The truth about this industry is hidden entirely in the back room, where those free donations immediately turn into a logistical nightmare. That is because a thrift store is not actually a retail fashion business at all. It is fundamentally a private waste sorting and disposal facility that just happens to have a small retail showroom attached to the front. You are not selling clothes. You are managing a very expensive garbage crisis. Before we look at why the math of sorting garbage destroys so many hopeful entrepreneurs, we need to map out what the secondhand industry actually looks like. When most people hear the word thrift store, they immediately picture massive nonprofit giants like Goodwill or the Salvation Army. Those organizations operate on an entirely different planetary scale. They benefit from heavy tax exemptions, subsidized labor programs, and a supply chain fueled entirely by charity. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the highly curated vintage boutiques. The owner spends weeks scouring flea markets to find one perfectly faded band T-shirt from the 1980s, only to mark it up by 1,000%. We are not talking about either of those today. We are focusing on the brutal, high-volume middle ground, the for-profit buy-sell-trade model. This is where the raw, unfiltered laws of supply and demand collide with massive operational bottlenecks. Think of local independent thrift warehouses or massive commercial chains that buy directly from the public. The perceived cash flow model here is dangerously seductive. A resident cleans out their closet and drives 2 garbage bags full of clothes to your loading dock. You buy it all for a few dollars, or maybe you pay by the pound, handing them a $10 bill. You take those same items, put them on a hanger, and price them at $8 to $15 a piece on the retail floor. You sell 3 shirts, and you have already made your money back. The rest is pure profit. It really does sound like a flawless money-printing machine. You are sourcing inventory at pennies on the dollar and selling it to a market that is increasingly obsessed with sustainable fashion. But that is exactly where the illusion ends and the reality of the trash sorting business begins. Most people assume the hardest part of retail is acquiring the product. So if the product is handed to you for free, the profit margins must be astronomical. You look at a rack of secondhand jackets priced at $12 each, knowing they were dropped off at the back door for absolutely nothing, and you calculate a near 100% gross margin. That assumption is exactly what kills the business in year 1. The inventory itself is the absolute cheapest part of the equation. It is the invisible process of transforming a garbage bag full of mystery garments into retail-ready merchandise that will bleed your bank account dry. Think about what actually happens the second a donation bin is emptied onto your sorting table. You cannot just slap a price tag on these items and hang them on a rack. They have been sitting in damp basements, dusty attics, and the trunks of cars for months. They smell like mothballs, pet dander, and stale cigarette smoke. You are no longer just a retailer. You are now operating a commercial sanitation facility. You have to pay for industrial-grade laundering, aggressive steam pressing, and chemical odor treatments just to get the inventory to a baseline level of public hygiene. And commercial utility rates for water and electricity are relentless. Let us do the math on a single item. A local resident hands you a heavy winter coat for free. It costs you about 40 to 60 cents in commercial water, electricity, and industrial detergent just to wash it. Then you factor in the hourly wage of the employee who has to untangle it, check all 7 pockets for used tissues or loose change, inspect the inner lining for tears, and run a commercial steamer over it for 3 minutes. That is another $1.20 in direct labor overhead. Add in the amortized cost of the specialty heavy-duty hanger, the tag fastener, and the printed barcode. Suddenly, that completely free coat has a hard baseline processing cost of around $2.15 before it ever sees the fluorescent lights of the sales floor. Pause and think about how that completely rewrites your financial reality. Now multiply that by the 2,000 items you need to process every single week, just to keep a medium-sized store fully stocked. You are spending over $4,000 a week, every week, strictly on the hidden logistics of cleaning and sorting. You are not getting free inventory at all. You are paying a heavy premium to refurbish unpredictable materials. If that coat sits on the rack for a month and you are forced to discount it to $3 just to make room for new stock, your mathematically impossible profit margin has just evaporated into a net loss. And you still have to pay the electric bill for that industrial steamer. You probably think that if you take in 1,000 pounds of used clothing, you will eventually sell 1,000 pounds of used clothing, or at least 800. That is the next fatal assumption of this business. The harsh reality is that most people do not donate items out of sheer generosity. They are using your business as a free municipal waste disposal service. When a family cleans out a dusty garage or a damp attic, they do not want to pay the heavy drop-off fees at the local landfill. It is much easier to pack it all into black garbage bags, drive it to your loading dock, and drive away feeling good about themselves. Industry insiders call this the trash ratio. On average, roughly 70 to 80% of what comes through the back doors of a high-volume thrift store is completely unsellable on the retail floor. You read that correctly. You are rejecting up to 8 out of every 10 items you touch. But you cannot just make those rejected items magically disappear. You have taken legal possession of them, which means you now have to pay to get rid of them. This is where the daily math gets incredibly depressing. Let us say your store processes 5,000 pounds of incoming goods a week. 4,000 pounds of that is stained, torn, missing buttons, or simply too degraded to put on a hanger. You now have 2 tons of garbage sitting in your back room that is taking up valuable square footage. You have to rent commercial dumpsters to handle the overflow. If you need a heavy-duty roll-off dumpster emptied twice a week at $300 per pickup, you are suddenly spending $2,400 a month strictly to throw away the inventory that people smiled and handed to you for free. Some owners think they can outsmart this trap by selling the unsellable items to textile recyclers, rag houses, or overseas salvage buyers. And yes, those salvage buyers do exist, but they are going to pay you perhaps 5 to 10 cents a pound for compressed mixed rags. Do the math on that transaction. If you manage to sell 4,000 pounds of textile waste, you generate a gross revenue of maybe $300. But you had to pay your staff $15 an hour to physically sort that waste, compress it into industrial bales, wrap it, and load it onto a freight truck with a forklift. The direct labor and equipment costs to prepare the salvage drastically outweigh the pennies you get paid for it. You are no longer running a profitable retail operation. You are actively subsidizing your city's waste management program, bleeding cash every single time a well-meaning neighbor drops off another box of unusable junk. It is easy to assume that because you are selling used goods, you can just rent a cheap, dilapidated warehouse on the edge of town, and people will still come hunting for bargains. That might have worked 20 years ago, but today, that is a guaranteed death sentence for your foot traffic. Modern consumers expect a premium retail experience even when they are buying second-hand. They want bright lighting, clean dressing rooms, wide aisles, and climate control. To get that, you have to compete for the exact same prime commercial real estate as a high-end grocery store or a national pharmacy chain. You are looking at leasing anywhere from 10,000 to 25,000 square feet in a high-visibility strip mall. Let us say you secure a decent spot at $24.50 per square foot annually. That means your base rent is over $20,000 every single month, before common area maintenance fees and property taxes. Now compare that overhead to your revenue model. A standard retail clothing store might generate $400 to $600 in sales per square foot because they are selling $60 sweaters. You are operating in that exact same expensive building, but you are trying to pay the rent by displaying a faded $3 t-shirt and a pair of scuffed boots priced at $8.50. Your sales per square foot might struggle to break $40 or $50. Let that structural mismatch sink in for a moment. You are paying premium retail rent, but you are generating flea market revenue. To keep the lights on, you have to push an unimaginable volume of low-ticket items through the registers every single day. If you have a slow week because of bad weather, your landlord does not care that you are a community thrift store. That massive rent check is still due on the 1st, and you have to sell a literal mountain of used shirts just to cover it. Staffing a thrift store seems like the easiest part of the model. You just hire a few college students at minimum wage to stand behind a register and occasionally straighten the clothing racks, right? That is a massive underestimation of the skill required to actually make this work. You do not just need cashiers. You need highly specialized human appraisers operating at assembly line speeds. Think about the fundamental difference between secondhand and traditional retail. In a standard clothing store, a shipment arrives with 500 identical shirts, all carrying the exact same barcode and a predetermined manufacturer price. It takes one person 5 minutes to enter that into the system. In a thrift store, you deal exclusively in unique, one-of-a-kind inventory. Every single item that comes out of those donation bags has to be manually evaluated. Let us look at the raw speed required to keep your business alive. If your store needs to process 3,000 items a day just to maintain a fully stocked retail floor, your backroom staff cannot spend 5 minutes researching every vintage tag. They have roughly 20 to 30 seconds per item. In that tiny half-minute window, a pricer has to identify the brand, check the collar for wear, inspect every zipper and button, determine if it is a counterfeit, and assign a price that is high enough to cover your massive overhead but low enough to ensure it actually sells. If they get it wrong, the financial damage is immediate. Suppose an exhausted pricer looks at a genuine vintage designer jacket but fails to recognize the faded tag, pricing it at $6 instead of $60. You just lost $54 of pure gross margin in an instant. Now imagine that same entry-level employee makes just 10 of those pricing errors a day. That is over $500 of lost revenue per shift. Multiply that by 300 operating days, and that single worker's lack of fashion expertise just cost your store $150,000 in missed margins for the year. Artificial intelligence cannot save you from this bottleneck. There is no software in the world that can automatically smell if a pair of denim jeans has a faint scent of mildew, or feel if a sweater is made of pure cashmere versus cheap synthetic polyester. You are entirely dependent on the physical senses, historical fashion knowledge, and daily stamina of an hourly worker. Human error is not just an operational annoyance here, it is the single biggest silent killer of your bottom line. You naturally assume your ultimate competitive advantage in this industry is price. The logic feels absolutely bulletproof. A brand new garment at a local mall costs $20 to $30. So if you price a gently used equivalent at $5 or $6, the budget-conscious consumer will always choose your store. But you are no longer competing against traditional mall retailers. You are competing against hyper-optimized digital supply chains from the other side of the planet. Enter the era of ultra-fast fashion giants. Companies like Shein and Temu do not just undercut your pricing. They completely destroy the fundamental value proposition of the second-hand market. A teenager looking for a weekend outfit does not need to spend an hour digging through your densely packed, disorganized racks hoping to find something that fits. They can pull out their smartphone, browse an endless algorithmic feed of trending styles, and order a brand-new, never-worn top in their exact size for $4.50. And it gets delivered directly to their porch. Let us look at the impossible math you are now facing on the sales floor. Someone donates one of these fast fashion shirts to your store. You have already spent your hard baseline cost of roughly $2 on the hidden processing, laundering, tagging, and labor just to get it onto a hanger. To make a sustainable margin and chip away at that massive commercial rent, you realistically need to price that slightly faded second-hand shirt at $5. But the exact same shirt, fresh off the factory line, currently retails on a global app for $3.99 with free shipping. You are now in a position where you are trying to sell a used, degraded product for more money than it costs brand new. It is an unwinnable retail proposition, and the structural damage to your business model goes even deeper. Because these ultra-fast fashion garments are manufactured as cheaply as possible using thin, low-grade synthetic blends, they are essentially disposable. They are not designed to survive a single season, let alone a second life cycle. When these items eventually make their way into your donation bins after a few washes, they are already stretched out, pilling, or structurally falling apart. You absolutely cannot put them on your retail floor. They immediately bypass your pricing station and go straight into your mounting pile of textile waste. Fast fashion is hitting you with a devastating double blow. It is systematically stealing your most price-sensitive customers, while simultaneously flooding your incoming supply chain with low-quality plastic clothing that you now have to pay commercial dumpster fees to throw away. Your biggest threat is not the rival thrift shop down the street. It is a global algorithm that is turning your entire inventory model into a massive liability. In traditional retail, loss prevention is a solved science. When a department store receives 100 identical pairs of jeans, those items are scanned into an automated inventory database. Every night, a computer system counts stock levels, flags discrepancies, and immediately alerts management to shoplifting or administrative error. You naturally assume that setting up a modern point-of-sale system in your thrift store will protect your inventory in the exact same way. That assumption completely ignores the structural reality of second-hand inventory. You are not managing stock counts of identical items. You are managing tens of thousands of completely unique, single-edition products. In a thrift store, every single item is a quantity of one. If someone slips a vintage leather belt into their jacket and walks out the front door, no automated inventory alarm goes off. Your computer system does not register a discrepancy because there was never a baseline quantity of 500 belts to compare against. The belt simply exists as a ghost on your floor, creating what the industry calls phantom inventory. You have no idea the item was even stolen until months later during a grueling manual audit, or when an e-commerce customer orders a product off your website that physically disappeared weeks ago. To make matters worse, Traditional anti-theft measures are economically impossible in this business. A standard hard electronic security tag costs roughly 15 to 25 cents, plus the manual labor time required to pin it onto a garment. When you are processing thousands of $4 shirts every single week, spending 20% of an item's retail value strictly on security, hardware destroys whatever microscopic profit margin you had left. As a result, most thrift store owners are forced to leave their racks completely unprotected. Let us calculate the financial damage of this massive operational blind spot. Retail shrinkage in secondhand stores frequently runs between 3 and 5% of total inventory, nearly double the average for traditional big-box retailers. If your sales floor holds 20,000 unique items and you lose just 15 items a day to shoplifting, tag swapping, or employee theft, at an average price of $8 per item, that is $120 disappearing into thin air every single day. Over the course of a year, that invisible leak bleeds more than $43,000 directly out of your bottom line. You are not just running a retail store with high turnover. You are running an open warehouse of untrackable goods where thousands of dollars in assets vanish without leaving a single trace on your balance sheet. If you want to see the absolute ceiling of this industry, you have to look at the biggest player in the game. You need to look at Savers, also known in some regions as Value Village. They started back in the 1950s with a single storefront in San Francisco. The founder realized early on that relying on random locals dropping off bags at a back door was a terrible, unpredictable way to scale. He needed a guaranteed pipeline of inventory, so he engineered a brilliant supply chain model. He partnered directly with established nonprofit charities. The charities would solicit donations from the community using their trusted names, and Savers would buy those goods in bulk directly from them. The nonprofit gets a steady stream of cash without the nightmare of running a retail store, and Savers gets thousands of tons of inventory delivered to their loading docks. It was a masterclass in raw logistics. And it worked beautifully. Savers grew into a multi-billion-dollar empire. They perfected the exact sorting factories we just talked about. Their back rooms became industrial marvels, processing millions of pounds of textiles every single day. They eventually filed for an initial public offering in 2023, hitting the stock market with a valuation that made them look like a tech unicorn rather than a used clothing vendor. But that aggressive scale eventually exposed the fatal flaws hiding inside their model. As their processing volume exploded, so did their human labor costs. When you are paying thousands of workers across hundreds of massive warehouses strictly to sort through other people's discarded items, a slight increase in the minimum wage wipes out millions in profit overnight. Their operating expenses ballooned. They became trapped by the sheer gravity of their own waste management machine. Then, the legal reality of the thrift business caught up with them. The Attorneys General of Minnesota and Washington State launched aggressive investigations into the company. The core issue was public transparency. When a resident drops off a bag of clothes at a bin plastered with a charity logo, they naturally assume the majority of that value is going directly to that charity. The lawsuits ripped the veil off the harsh math of the for-profit thrift model. The investigations revealed that charities were often getting paid mere pennies per pound, while Savers was taking the highly desirable items, marking them up on their retail floors, and keeping the massive margins to satisfy private equity investors. The company was forced into multi-million-dollar settlements. They had to radically change their marketing and explicitly disclose exactly how little of a customer's purchase actually goes to a charitable cause. The Savers case study proves something critical. Even if you build the most efficient sorting operation on Earth, you cannot escape the crushing overhead of manual labor and the fragile psychology of the second-hand donor. They survived, but their public financial statements show exactly how thin the ice really is when your entire empire is built on monetizing the things people throw away. Ultimately, there are really only two ways this story ends for the independent thrift store owner. In the rare best-case scenario, you stop trying to be a dumping ground for the entire city. You secure highly curated donation pipelines, like exclusive partnerships with local estate liquidators or high-income neighborhood associations. You aggressively manage your trash ratio down to 30%, keeping your disposal fees microscopic. By moving lower volumes of much higher quality goods, your net profit margins can actually hover around a very healthy 15 to 20%. But the far more common, brutal reality is the bad scenario. You open your loading dock to the general public and immediately drown in a tidal wave of unusable fast fashion and moldy linens. Your commercial rent eats your cash reserves, your teenage staff misprices the only valuable items you do get, and you end up spending thousands of dollars a month paying a waste management company to haul away the inventory you happily accepted for free. The illusion of 100% margins fades, leaving you trapped in a high-stress, low-return grind. Because at the end of the day, you have to remember the fundamental truth of this business. A thrift store is not actually a retail fashion empire. It is a private waste sorting and disposal facility that just happens to have a small retail showroom attached to the front.